Good morning and welcome to the Atlantic Council. I'm Jonathan Panikoff, and as director of our Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative, it's my privilege to lead the Council's work on Pakistan and to thank the diverse crowd of government officials, private sector partners, and civil society colleagues for being with us here in our studios in downtown Washington, D.C., and to the many of you joining us online from across the globe. We're particularly honored today to have the opportunity to welcome back to the Atlantic Council Pakistan's Federal Minister of Finance and Revenue, His Excellency Muhammad Aurangzeb. His leadership during Pakistan's latest IMF program and his ongoing efforts to stabilize fiscal fundamentals while restoring investor confidence have drawn optimism, even as many continue to be eager for even greater reform. That optimism, however, comes at a time of increased challenges for Pakistan's economy. Minister Aurangzeb came into office just over 12 months ago, and to say that the global economic, finance, and trade dynamics have radically shifted since then would be an understatement. Today, we're excited to have an opportunity to engage with the minister to find out how his views have changed on the required drivers of Pakistani economic growth, on the future of bilateral economic and trade cooperation with China, with East Asian partners, and with European, Middle East, and African countries. And of course, the phrase you are all waiting for me to utter, what about tariffs? And not only the implications for the future of trade relationship with the US, but how will tariffs threaten to impact the totality of US-Pakistani bilateral relations, and what may be the secondary and tertiary effects of them for Pakistan's position in a quickly shifting geopolitical landscape. We are thrilled that today's event will be moderated by Asam Hussain, a former deputy director of the IMF's Middle East and Central Asia Division, whose brilliant and insightful issue brief, Rescuing Pakistan's Economy, the Atlantic Council was proud to publish earlier this month. I also want to highlight how grateful I am to all of you who have supported our South Asia work over the years here at the Atlantic Council, with special thanks to Hasnan Aslam and Ashraf Kazi, whose support has been instrumental in helping to make events such as today's a reality. And now, as I turn the conversation over to Asam, please join me in welcoming Minister Aurangzeb back to the Atlantic Council.
Thank you.
Jonathan, thank you very much for the intro. I don't know if it's you or if it's the minister, but the rest of you can't see this, but time is standing still, so it makes my job a whole lot easier. Minister, I'm going to ask you all the hard questions, and then we'll leave the easy questions for later. So with your permission, we'll get going. What a difference a year makes. You were here a year ago. You were in the midst of bringing Pakistan back from the economic brink. And now, a year later, reserves are rising, inflation has moderated to 2%, a ratings upgrade, even the fiscal balance is getting a little bit better. Let me start by asking you about the fiscal situation. How are you going about balancing the competing demands on the one hand of instilling fiscal discipline, with the other, on the other hand, restoring some level of social and investment spending to sustain the reform momentum?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Dr. Asim. It's a real pleasure to be back here at the Council. First of all, congratulations on this very high-tech office. You're right. I was here a little more than a year back, and at that point in time, we had successfully concluded the 9-month SBA. We talked about the reason why we are wanting to go into the extended facility to bring more permanence to the macroeconomic stability, and even more importantly, execute structural reforms under the EFF umbrella. And as you point out, a year down the road, I think we have, in the cricket terminology, some runs on the scoreboard. And macroeconomic situation has stabilized, and from my perspective, it's not an end in itself, it's a means to an end, because it's all about basic hygiene. So we are in a good place from that perspective Now, where do we go from here? Because as a country, we have been at this juncture before as well, and therefore, how we take it forward and we don't squander this opportunity to avoid boom and bust cycles is going to be extremely important as we look forward. Now, coming back to the fiscal side of things, of course, the tax revenues and tax to GDP, we are going to get to roughly 10.6% at the end of this year. Last year, our tax revenues went up by 29%. If all goes well, it'll be anywhere between 28 to 30% in terms of absolute numbers this year as well. But apart from that, how we deal with the public finance side, right? Because I think that's where your point is. Have we created the fiscal space in the first year as we've gone through this transition to move towards social sectors or to move towards funding or financing from where I sit to existential issues for Pakistan, which is population and climate. And I would say there are a couple of things. One, we have some space available, for example, in terms of with the policy rate coming down, in terms of what we did in terms of active debt management, roughly ₹1 trillion in debt servicing cost saving is helpful and also looks promising for next year as well. The National Fiscal Pact, as you know, it was a structural benchmark, but working with the provincial governments, it has allowed us now the platform in which we can figure out whether some of the expenditures which have always been picked up by the federal government, including some of the social sector spending, if that can be shared with the provinces going forward, and whether some of the revenues can also come from the provinces and incentivization around that, because in the last year, the agriculture income tax is really the first time in the history of Pakistan that has been legislated by the provincial assemblies. So I think that's one part where we are beginning to get some fiscal space. I wouldn't say it's too much, because you know it better than I do, that some of our stuff is pretty sticky. And of course, we are working on the right size in the federal government, etc. But I do think what we have been able to work with our multilateral partners, because exactly this time around, the discussion that I had with President Banga, right, in terms of when I talked to him about climate and population. And he said, we are willing to work with you, but make sure you remain focused. And because this goes beyond the project financing and the usual stuff that we ask for in terms of multilateral lending. So that translated in January, the 10-year country partnership framework. And that in itself will allow us some level of flexibility in terms of concessional finance on the public sector side. And as you know, there's going to be the private sector component in there as well from the IFC side. So that should give us enough coverage to sort of look into this, because 4 out of the 6 points in this country partnership framework actually deal with population and climate related to that, right? So while population is growing at 2.55%, et cetera, it has its own issues, but there are really 2 associated issues with that. Child stunting, 40% of children under the age of 5 who are stunted. That's our future leadership of the country. And then learning poverty, which is really girls out of school. So it hits education, it hits getting our young women into the productive workforce, and it get also into then climate resiliency around floods, et cetera, and then decarbonization, which is pollution. So that should allow us space on the funding and financing side as we go forward.
Well, thank you. I want to come back to both the existential issues, as you call them, the demographic side, as well as the climate issues in a second. But if I could, just a quick follow-up on the fiscal. So Pakistan's tax revenue ratio is among the lowest globally. And it is very much a focus of your reforms. Some observers have said, though, that even with the drive to register taxpayers in the retail sector, and even with the passage of laws to enable taxation of agricultural income, that meaningful revenue will only come if you are able to verify the income that these people declare. And do they have a point?
I think there's sort of two aspects to it. One is the short to medium term, and the other is medium to long term. We, again, you know it well, cash in circulation, Pakistan, 9 trillion rupees. The tax revenue budget for this year is 12.3 trillion. Now that cash in circulation is a function of leakage from the existing base, plus the segments which were not in the net, right? Which is real estate, retail, wholesale, agriculture, etc. Now, we have to start moving that in the direction of the more formal economy. That will take time. So, you're right. I mean, some of the skeptical folks said this will never happen in terms of the imposition of agriculture income tax. So the same set of people are now saying you will not be able to collect it. So the way I look at it, one thing at a time, my friends. Let's first, it's been done. Now through the National Tax Council, etc., we will try to see how we get it done. But the more immediate thing, Dr. Asim, is really coming from enforcement and compliance. And that is where the end-to-end digitalization and the technology is working very well already in terms of plugging those leakages. Because the reality is, I'm just coming out of a panel discussion as well on this tax thing. So two pushbacks. One, this is informal economy. That has been the engine of growth. Why are you touching it? Let the country grow. But it's not sustainable, right? And because, as a country, our hand has been forced. If we continue to tax the same for more, which is really the manufacturing industry and the salaried class, which are up to here, is not sustainable. So we have to bring these segments in. The other is the trust factor, where people during last year as well said, we'll come and pay you more, but we don't want to deal with FBR. Now, that's also not sustainable. If you don't have trust and credibility in the tax authority of your country, well, there's something very wrong. So people, process, technology, and that's what we are working on. And that is the only way, and especially the technology, right? So now we are sort of AI-driven audits, the faceless customs, the track and trace system. So the digital enforcement of it has helped us already in a big way this year, and will continue to help us as we go forward.
No, thank you for that. I guess now your existential challenge, the first one, demographics, it's something that I personally have worked on. The Atlantic Council paper that just came out highlights the role of Pakistan's very rapid population growth, its impact in terms of hamstringing growth through its effect on saving, which in turn lowers investment. Can you tell us more about, so you mentioned the financing side of projects in this area, but tell us more, if you will, on what sorts of projects, especially with regard to education, especially girls' education and family planning, perhaps, that the government more generally is looking to pursue.
Yeah. So I think from our perspective, first of all, it has to start with acknowledgement that it is an issue. So I think we have sort of crossed that bridge as a government institution, and it's really whole of the government approach, because that's very important, because the federal government can do only that much, and then the provinces have to come in, and because that's where a lot of sort of operational delivery has to be. So we are working with the provincial governments in terms of the how part of it, because the financing part of it, and I think I won't be complacent about it, but as I just mentioned, I think enough is going on, there. So there are now clear projects, also looking at the Bangladesh journey. because they obviously dealt with it quite effectively. But it is a journey, right? But you have to, again, like taxation, you have to start from somewhere. So this now is working with the various federal ministries and with the provinces. An entire work plan is being brought up in terms of whatever we want to call it, family planning or family management, because these things are related, right? Because you can address it right at the top and say, how do we deal with 2.55%? Or you actually go down and say, what are the various work streams which in turn will come back and affect this 2.55%? So case in point is this child stunting. So previously, what have we done? We have done nutritional interventions and tried to figure out whether this, but we haven't been successful. And the reason why I haven't been successful to the extent that we should have been, because it's directly linked with, the time between the childbirths and sort of the mother's health, etc. That is the way we, can sort of go into that intervention and make it happen. To me, the what and why is as you know, you've heard me saying that, we've known it for the longest time. It's the how part of it.
No, and I'm very glad to hear also that you're looking at the Bangladesh experience, because they have achieved some success in this area. So, turning to your second existential challenge, that of climate resilience. So you have championed private sector-led growth, and you've talked about the private sector being the engine of growth. Can you tell us about reforms underway to encourage or attract private investment, especially in climate resilience and in financing the energy transition? And in the latter, a specific thought is a possibility of Pakistan issuing green bonds to retire some of the more high emission energy projects that are a drain on the public finances also. Is that a possibility?
Yeah. So I'll come back to the climate finance in a moment. I think, like many things in the country, the real challenge again is the how part of it. If you think about it, even before we fast forward to now, the floods in 22, the Geneva pledges, very little of that money actually flew in, right? Because there was a very small component of grants. The rest was really all in terms of project funding. Where we failed as a country was not being able to come up with investable, bankable projects, right? Where you can structure, you can monitor, and you can report to international standards. That's why that money never came in. Now, if you look at just the climate finance itself, right? So what do we have at this point in time? Asian Development Bank came in with $500 million end of December. Then in the country partnership framework, we have at least 1/3 of that 20 billion is related to climate. We have just, as you might have heard, as part of the staff level agreement, we have just done a $1.3 billion of resiliency fund with IMF. Of course, it has now 13 reform measures associated with that, so we'll have to deliver to actually get that milestone funding. So there's multilateral financing which is available. Then some people are coming up with private sector funds like the Equipment Fund. Then there are discussions around the more sort of innovative aspects of it, which you just alluded to. What do we do with the carbon credits and how we develop carbon markets, and then the green sukuks and green bonds. Now, the State Bank is in the process of finalizing the green taxonomy guidelines, because I do think it's very important that we have a framework where you can say, what is actually green. So in the June timeframe, they will come out with the green taxonomy framework. if you recall, the first green bond actually has already been done internationally. And that was done by a parastatal, a utility company called WABDA. And it was a few years back, just pre-COVID, when they issued a $500 million green bond. It was led by JP Morgan. And at that point in time, the overall appetite from the green investors was actually close to $3 billion. So it was 6 times oversubscribed. WABDA never went for the green shoe option. They could have raised $750 million. So I think that's one benchmark that we already have. The second is some of the green sukuks that we are issuing locally now through Ministry of Finance and the State Bank. And the last thing I just want to mention there is we are quite hopeful that during this calendar year, we can print the first inaugural Panda bond. Now that is going to also be green in nature because the proceeds of those bonds are going to be linked with the SDG projects. So a lot is happening in that space. But the more important part, Dr. Asim, I keep on coming back to the same point that, and it might sound actually, Secretary EAD sitting here, Secretary Finance sitting here, so they might say, what is he saying that we have enough financing? But I do think financing is less of an issue, especially as we now move towards a better credit rating, etc. It's really our ability to implement and execute on ground. And that's where, the whole of the government approach where and that's where I'm very appreciative that, all our multilateral partners, not only providing us funding, financing, but the technical support. That's one. The other thing is we as the government have to take ownership and be held accountable. Because about everything that you just said about many things, billions of dollars have come into Pakistan. And the reality is there is not much to show, right, in terms of impact, which it should have created across various spectrums, including some of the social sectors, including some of these existential issues. But now with this RSF, what I have requested the Minister of Climate Change, that in terms of governance, we co-chair this, right? We take joint ownership and then work with the provinces, work with the other line ministries so that we actually make it happen.
Minister, hearing all this about finance, I want to now move the conversation a little bit to the global arena. As you may know, the Atlantic Council has had something called the Bretton Woods 2.0 project, where they've discussed reform of the international financial institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions, to better serve the membership and to better deal with the international financial system as it has evolved. So from your vantage point, especially as someone who has had to deal with a very heavy debt burden, how can the Bretton Woods institutions be reformed to better serve a country like Pakistan? And in particular, do you believe that a platform for countries to jointly manage sort of concessional finance flows, is that something that's workable? And if so, how should it work?
Yeah, I would say, fortunately, as given all the exogenous shocks that we are going through at this point in time, we're very fortunate to have leadership both at the IMF and at the World Bank Group level, who are forward-thinking, who are progressive, who are willing and wanting to do introspection in their institutions, and to see how their effectiveness and relevance, more importantly, especially I'm just coming out of a G24 session as well, because it's a very live issue, right? I mean, there are countries which are doing well. There are countries which certainly fall in the context of vulnerable, And at this point in time, their liquidity and everything else is under stress and can possibly be even more under stress. So the surveillance discussion that the IMF is having in terms of how they want to, move forward. As the finance minister, I would be remiss if I don't talk about their charges and their commitment fees and their other things which they are willing to consider. I think we see a very progressive approach there. And then with President Banga, and I think the few changes that they have already made, right, in terms of coming together as one bank group, where public sector and private sector come together, rather than working in silos, in number one. Number two, actually the multilaterals beginning to work with each other and leverage the work that they are going to on working with various countries. For example, we heard President Banga yesterday as well that we deal with ADB, we deal with AIB, we deal with the World Bank. Now, if there is a project that they're jointly working on, so they bring in the private sector part, they bring in the guarantee part, but then he should leverage the counterparty risk analysis and everything, and they have agreed in terms of this mutually taking it forward. So I find that they, given everything that's going on, that they're willing to review some of their processes and really also hold themselves. I mentioned ownership and accountability at our end, but these institutions also need to have ownership and accountability at their end to really drive impact. And I think between the two leaders, I see them leading from the front.
Minister, before we run out of time, I guess I have to ask you the question that I know is on everyone's minds. What about the tariffs?
Yeah, so I think we've, as a country, we've already, the Prime Minister already mentioned that there will be a high-level delegation which will come in. But, if I look at it, just the fact base, right? Our weighted average tariff on US imports is a little over 7%. On the other side, our exports, the weighted average tariff is a little over 10%. So I don't think it's really about tariffs. It's the situation around the imbalance, if you want to call it, on the trade side. We don't necessarily see that as a big issue. The high quality cotton is already being imported. Can we do more? Soybeans are already coming in. Can we do more? Can we also look at some of the other asset classes? I think it's less of an issue. But from where we sit, I think it's a real opportunity for us to very constructively engage with the US in the wider spectrum, because this is commerce and trade. Overall, our export is whatever, $5.2 billion. We import, $2 billion, so the imbalance is 3.4. The minerals conference that just finished, right? And the US delegation, a very high-level delegation, was there. And, we genuinely believe that there's a win-win situation there. Copper is going to be a very critical component and enabler in the energy transition. We also know that at the global level, this is going to have shortage. Our Tatian belt is the supply side answer to that equation. And the interest which is coming in, Ricodec is only the first one. And then we can sort of go from there, and also not only in terms of ore, but also the value addition and the downstream stuff is going to be a real game changer for Pakistan. And that's what US is also looking very interested in terms of rare earth. And so I do think we have something to offer in the wider scheme of things, just looking beyond the immediate tariff discussion.
Thank you, Minister. You have been generous with your time, and we appreciate all your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A real pleasure. All right. Thank you.